Jean-Jacques Rousseau, father of the French Revolution and environmentalism. Talk about the fountainhead of evil in philosophy. And Rousseau wasn't just responsible for the French Revolution and environmentalism. He's the first proto-Marxist. Philosophy professors love to lump Rousseau in with John Locke, as if the fact that they both talked about the social contract makes them similar in any way at all. Locke was pro-reason, pro-enlightenment, pro-freedom, pro-individual, whereas Rousseau was a collectivist, anti-enlightenment, anti-reason, anti-freedom, and thought that civilization and property rights undermined people's morals. Though these two are not similar at all. It pisses me off that so many people are taught in college that these two philosophers are similar. Let's look at the French Revolution first. One thing most philosophy professors don't mention is that Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the intellectual father of the French Revolution. But what they love to do is lump Rousseau in with John Locke, as I said earlier, because they both talked about a social contract. At some very surface level point of view, they sound like they're similar for this reason. They also both talk about man in a state of nature that is outside of civilization. In Locke's case, this is a purely theoretical thought process, but it's closely mirrored by Robinson Crusoe, which was based on a real-life story. In Rousseau's case, instead of suggesting that living in a state of nature is a very difficult and dangerous task, Rousseau idolizes the idea of man living in a state of nature, suggesting that it's like some sort of utopia. So instead of his social contract with other people being designed to make life better, it's just to make sure that your life isn't corrupted by society or civilization and property rights. But this is easily skimmed over by philosophy professors. I'd love to talk about the idea that the French Revolution was about reason and the rights of man, but that would be a lie. They like to portray the French Revolution as if it was very much the same as the American Revolution, but the two were not similar at all. A key point in understanding Rousseau is that he tempered everything about the rights of man by the general will. The general will, according to Rousseau, is the collective will of the people aimed at the common good. He argues that the general will is always right, and that individuals should submit their particular wills to the general will for the benefit of society, which is the exact opposite of Locke. Locke rejects the common good as the standard for a proper government. He's one of the only political philosophers to do this. According to Locke, the goal of a proper government is the protection of individual natural rights. The U.S. Declaration of Independence adopted this idea explicitly. The Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights, were specifically about protecting natural rights of individuals, not the common good. Because that's what a free person is. It's a person whose natural rights are protected. Rousseau, on the other hand, states that the purpose of government is to protect the general will and the common good. This is the complete opposite of Locke. There's no way that any philosophy professor who spent any time studying this could have confused these two, but they purposely lumped them together to confuse people and smear Locke. It's easy to confuse people who only have a cursory understanding of the French and the American Revolution. But this idea of the general will finds itself into the French Rights of Man of 1789. Specifically, in Article 6, it states, "The law is the expression of the general will." This comes straight from Rousseau. So the law is not based on property rights and the fact that you own yourself or natural rights, which is what common law that the U.S. adopted is about. It's based on this collectivist idea called the general will, according to Rousseau, and the French Revolution's rights of man. This is a complete perversion of the idea of rights. Rights are individual, they're not collective, they're not subject to the general will. There's no such thing as the right of the general will. Just to show how confused these people were, In Article 1 of the Rights of Man, they say all men are born and remain free and equal in rights. But they put this caveat: social distinctions may be founded upon the general good. So once again, we see that the mob in the French Revolution is allowed to do whatever it wants to. This is a complete perversion of the idea of the American Revolution. Your so-called rights are just completely tempered by the general will under the French Revolution, which is mob rule. Unlike the American Revolution, where it was specifically stated that sovereignty rests in the people. In the French Revolution, it was not the people, it was the nation. Article 3 of the Rights of Man states, nobody, no individual may exercise any authority which does not directly proceed from the nation. So this is a completely collectivist idea. Not surprisingly, the French Revolution and the American Revolution turned out completely differently. The French Revolution turns into a mass genocide, whereas the American Revolution creates the greatest country in the world, a country that has essentially built the modern world that we live in today. The French Revolution, despite its talking about being built on reason and the rights of man, was built on neither. In the early part of the French Revolution, they talked about what was called the cult of reason. That was the undermining of the church and religion, and included a number of reforms, including secular reforms and the metric system. Supposedly, the cult of reason personalities replaced Christianity with the worship of reason, which they personified as a goddess, often a living woman in white robes. Churches, including Notre Dame, were converted into temples of reason. Festivals featured processions and hymns to reason, liberty, nature, and symbolic rejection of Catholicism. But as the French Revolution unfolded, the cult of reason people were replaced by the cult of the Supreme Being, a deistic alternative that still exalted reason and virtue, but included a vague non-Christian God as a moral anchor. This was pushed by Robespierre and Bertrand Bailly, who were vocal admirers of Rousseau. So the French Revolution, to the extent it was based on reason at all, converted to Rousseau's point of view. Rousseau was an anti-enlightenment thinker, critical of the Enlightenment's excessive reliance on reason and its tendency to dismiss emotions, instincts, and natural impulses. According to Rousseau, the Enlightenment's focus on reason had led to a disconnect from nature and a corruption of human nature. In his view, reason alone was insufficient for understanding human behavior and society. So his ideal was the pre-civilization brute who didn't have property rights and didn't use reason. While Locke, who lived before Rousseau by almost a century, was a foundational figure in the Enlightenment, defining reason as an essential tool for discovering truth through experience and evidence rather than innate ideas or authority or superstition. He argued for using individual reason to achieve moral and epistemic autonomy. Locke and Rousseau are almost the exact opposite of each other. Not satisfied with just producing one of the bloodiest revolutions in history, Rousseau goes on to be the father of environmentalism. Rousseau is widely acknowledged to be a foundational figure in environmentalism, advocating a return to nature and criticizing how civilization and private property corrupt both human morality and the natural world. Funny, this sounds very much like the Adam and Eve story. Rousseau, in works like Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men, 1755, described humans in their original state as solitary, self-sufficient, compassionate, and living in harmony with their environment. They had simple needs, self-preservation, and did not exploit nature or each other excessively. Civilization, especially private property, inequity, inequality, and progress corrupts the natural goodness of men, leading to dependency, greed, and environmental harm, according to Rousseau. Thus, he's known for promoting the idea of the noble savage, which so many crazy people have bought into, and so many Europeans come to visit the American Southwest to find the noble savage, which, if they knew the actual history, their noble savage was incredibly violent, and it was not equitable or fair. They didn't live simply at all, but violently, or in harmony with nature at all. They drove whole buffalo herds off of cliffs for their needs of eating and clothing. Incredibly inefficient and environmentally damaging. But Rousseau wasn't done there. He was a critic of progress in society. He condemned bourgeois society, mechanistic designs, and unchecked perfectibility. Perfectibility he saw as humans' drive to improve, which he saw as leading to artificial needs and destruction. This anticipates environmentalist concerns with industrialization, consumerism, and the idea of progress decades before the environmental movement. In his work, A Meal on Education in 1762, he explicitly describes the bourgeois as a flawed modern type of man, a man torn between natural self-love and social love. He is neither fully natural nor a true citizen. He will be the man of our day, a Frenchman, an Englishman, a bourgeois. He will be nothing. So not only did Rousseau destroy the French Revolution and create one of the world's worst genocides, but he's responsible for the modern environmentalist movement, which is responsible for deaths of billions of people, and whose goal is to eliminate 95% of the humans on this world. But he also was an influence on Marx, who picks up on this idea of the bourgeois being evil. But in his case, the bourgeois are the villains in his economic class warfare. So how did the philosophical father of the environmentalist movement live his life? Jean-Jacques Rousseau was born in 1712 and died in 1778. He was born in Geneva, a Calvinistic city-state. His mother died a few days after his birth, an event that haunted him. His father raised him initially, sharing a love of romantic novels and classical literature, but he fled to Geneva after a quarrel with authorities. Rousseau had a difficult childhood. He was apprenticed to an engraver, where he supposedly experienced harsh treatment and began petty theft. He ran away from Geneva at age 16. He wandered through Italy, France, and Savoy, taking odd jobs. In Annecy, he met Frances Louise de Warnes, a wealthy older woman who became his benefactor and eventual lover. He had a long-term relationship and a family with Thérèse Lavoisier. They met in Paris in 1745. Lavoisier was an illiterate seamstress and laundress, about 10 to 12 years younger than Rousseau. They married informally in 1768. According to Rousseau, they had 5 children, all of whom were placed in a Paris fondling house shortly after their birth. Rousseau justified this by citing his poverty, his unstable lifestyle, and belief that the children would be better raised by the state. Critics like Voltaire saw this as hypocrisy, especially given his writings on education in Emile. Voltaire was highly critical of Rousseau's back-to-nature ideals and exposed the child abandonment. David Hume helped Rousseau flee persecution in England, but the relationship collapsed into paranoia. Rousseau accused Hume of plotting against him. So 2 of the most evil philosophers in modern history, Rousseau and Hume, knew each other and quote-unquote sort of supported each other. You would think with Rousseau's ideas about the noble savage, he might have actually tried practicing that, much like Thoreau's On Walden Pond. But in fact, he suffered from paranoia, hypochondria, and isolation and described himself as sensitive, vain, and prone to emotional extremes. And he never did try to live as a noble savage. Henry David Thoreau is another favorite of environmentalists, who wrote about living on Walden Pond. But the truth is, he did not live as a hermit in pristine wilderness. He lived close to his hometown. Thoreau lived on Walden Pond from June 4, 1845 to September 6, 1847, 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. He built a small cabin on land owned by his friend and mentor, Ralph Waldo Emerson. The cabin was less than half a mile from the railroad tracks and the main road into Concord. Thoreau walked into town frequently, every day or two, for visits and meals with his family and friends, supplies, and news. His mother and sisters often brought food and reportedly did his laundry. He grew beans and other crops, selling some for profit, worked odd jobs, and received help from many friends. So, in fact, the whole Walden Pond thing is a fraud pushed by environmentalists, and Rousseau didn't even have the guts to live as a noble savage that he promoted. Like Marx, Rousseau was a grifter and a parasite. So the legacy of Rousseau is that of the failed French Revolution, the attack on reason, the attack on the Enlightenment, modern environmentalism, which is anti-reason, and is trying to wipe out 95% of the human beings on this earth. In addition, he's sort of an intellectual father to Marxism, which has killed billions of people if you include the environmentalist movement. Rousseau is not someone to be looked up to. He's somebody that should be condemned and should be thrown on the scrap heap of history. Long live freedom, damn it.